The CoinDesk Spotlight is brought to you by Nexo, the place to earn on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and more. Silicon Valley is often painted as a bastion of idealism and progressive liberalism, but our next guest offers a different take through the eyes of big tech's leading conservative, Peter Thiel, the multi-billionaire who co-founded PayPal and seeded Facebook, Airbnb, and Spotify. Joining us now is Max Chafkin, Bloomberg journalist and author of The Contrarian. Hello there, Max. Thank you for joining us. So you make a case that Peter Thiel, good morning, is essentially the one who wrote the playbook for Silicon Valley tech behemoths like Facebook, Airbnb, Web 2.0. Can you explain what that underlying philosophy is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you left out, one important early pioneer in digital currency as well. So Thiel, the playbook that Thiel created is the kind of disruption playbook. We talk about sometimes a cult of disruption in Silicon Valley, this idea that startups should grow really big, really quickly, and should be kind of willing to bend the rules or even break the rules at times, when things call for it. Thiel's somebody who thinks that, kind of like the institutional consensus, any consensus, is generally wrong. And he's, kind of always looking to kind of poke that and in the world of business, seed startups or start companies that can potentially overturn that consensus. And he sees that both as a way to make money, but also as an ideological force as well. And for Thiel, you hinted at this, ideology and business are very closely connected.
Interesting. And you mentioned an early funder of cryptocurrency. He gave a grant to Vitalik Buterin, who is the creator of Ethereum, of course. But taking a look at Facebook, or Meta, as they call themselves now, they're building a metaverse, shifting from Web 2 to Web 3.0. Now, on the one hand, a lot of Thiel's libertarianism, stick it to the man attitude, is at the heart of crypto and Web 3. But on the other hand, Web 3 is a backlash against big tech centralized companies. How do you think the transition from Web 2 to Web 3.0 will go for incumbent tech giants like Meta, like Facebook?
Well, so I think this is telling because, of course, as you say, Thiel he's on the board of Meta. It's very hard to remember to call it Meta, but he's on the board of Meta. He is somebody who I think, you can tell a story where Silicon Valley as it exists today, these gigantic, monopolistic, sort of all powerful companies, running our lives and potentially like controlling our minds. Like Thiel has created that in a really important way, and he's still a part of that. But he's also turned critic. He has for years and years been talking about, kind of the sort of monopolistic potential of tech. And he's even kind of come close to criticizing Facebook, So I think he's somebody, I think Thiel's somebody who's sort of always been, kind of at the forefront. And he has been sort of pushing in this direction for years and years and years. Of course, he also has made a lot of money from, Web 2. So he's kind of got bets on both sides of this. And I don't think you should look at Thiel as somebody who is, kind of a stand-in for big tech. He's somebody who helped build big tech and who's now betting on this kind of next generation of technology companies, these distributed tech companies. And he's even started to talk about Facebook as kind of as a decentralizing force, which I think a lot of people would find maybe self-interested. He's just on the board. He's trying to kind of help the company adapt or whatever. But it does show kind of like where he is ideologically and where even people who are kind of really bought in to kind of Silicon Valley as it exists today, they definitely see this as a new and emerging trend.
So how does Peter Thiel look at the likes of Elon Musk and Max Levchin? I mean, how are they getting along? Are they getting along? How does he get along with Mark Zuckerberg? I mean, does he admire them? Is he jealous of them? Like, what's really going on there?
All right, well, let's take them. I think those are a bunch of really interesting questions. So Thiel and Mark Zuckerberg have a close relationship. I mean, he's one of the Thiel, I think, is one of the only people who, Mark Zuckerberg really listens to. He's the longest serving outside board member. He's somebody Zuckerberg, respects tremendously. He has an enormous influence on Facebook. If you want to get in Mark Zuckerberg's ear, Peter Thiel is a good way to do it. Thiel and Elon Musk now have a much more contentious relationship, and a really interesting one. They were both founders. They were founders of two different companies that merged to create PayPal. So they're sort of co-founders of PayPal. And early on, Musk was the CEO of PayPal, and Thiel was kind of like the junior partner. Musk went on a honeymoon, in 2000 or 2001, and when he came back, Thiel had done a coup and had replaced him as CEO. And that coup and that kind of betrayal has sort of always hung over their relationship. And there is kind of this sort of frenemy quality to them where they invest in one another's companies. I think they have a mutual respect, but they have some very different ideas. Thiel is much more interested in, libertarian politics and in ideology. And Musk, of course, is sort of all in on these big technology bets, one of which Thiel's an investor in SpaceX, but Thiel, did not, crucially invest in Tesla Motors, Elon Musk's electric car company. And part of the reason for that, as I write in the book, is that, they have a disagreement on climate change. Musk is somebody who, really cares about climate change, as we know, and Thiel's somebody who sees the, climate consensus as being, a product of like the liberal, elites or whatever. He's kind of a climate denier. And so that was, that was a source of tension for them as well.
So anything about his early years, Peter Thiel's early years, does that tell us anything about Peter Thiel, the investor now? I mean, it seems like he had a lot of self-identity issues in college, but what does that translate to now, many years later, as he's throwing billions around here and there?
Well, let me bring up a couple of things. I mean, and so Thiel's personal story is really, really fascinating. Like he, born in Germany, bounced around a lot as a kid, had no real technical expertise. There's sort of no reason for him to assume this like incredible influence in the tech industry. No reason for him to be, the most powerful venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, except that he is, very good at, kind of communicating and sort of marketing himself, and also very good at kind of seeing the future. So it's this kind of amazing, almost quintessentially American story where he, he's kind of this self-created person who takes over the tech industry and more recently has kind of had a huge influence in Republican politics. The other thing is, and you kind of alluded to this, he had a tough childhood. He was bullied as a kid. He was kind of an outsider, and in particular, an outsider politically. He felt like he was this, lone conservative in a sea of liberals, and that shaped his identity. In terms of his ideology, it's like part of the reason I think he, became a Donald Trump supporter, and he's a, major conservative political figure now. But it also shaped his kind of conception of investing, where he sort of sees, as I alluded to earlier, he's somebody who sees the world in terms of, these trends that everybody's bought into, and he's going to take the other side of the bet, and that's something that if you're a venture capitalist, it can work really nicely, because venture capital is all about placing these high leverage, high risk bets that can pay off enormously. And we've seen that over and over in Thiel's career. Where he was the first outside investor in Facebook. He started Palantir. And it's gone on, and now we're seeing he's making these bets, of course, in the world of crypto and so on. So there's that. And then one other thing I want to bring up, and I kind of hinted at this. I mean, you mentioned Thiel's connection to Ethereum, but really it goes way further back than that, because PayPal, we think of PayPal. Thiel co-founded PayPal. We think of it as this kind of clever way to pay for things on eBay, right? It's like, I bought something. It's like totally kind of mundane technology that is like kind of a big part of how the internet works today. But that's crucially not how Thiel saw it when he started it, and not how he talked about it. He talked about it in almost the exact same way that people talk about Bitcoin. He talked about how this was digital money, and how once you had value stored in digital wallets was going to become very, very hard for governments to control. And that was part of, the early ideology of PayPal, as part of like why they were doing it. And I think it had an influence on, on everybody else in the digital money space. And when you look at the kind of, crypto, of course, has become much more diverse in recent years, and you not everybody is a crazy libertarian, but of course that libertarian streak, this idea of crypto as a way to kind of separate oneself from the federal government or from governments around the world, that's something that Thiel and his co-founders, including Musk and others, helped pioneer.
Do you think, though, that he would be for decentralization? Because you mentioned Facebook, and a lot of folks in crypto are very skeptical of Facebook and their efforts to design a metaverse and their intent to, enter Web3 and the extent that they can create decentralization. A lot of people think that they can't, given their track record of taking everyone's data and using it to influence elections. Yeah. So, and just from your book, it sounds that like Peter Thiel is someone who is about the cult of personality and installing dictators, if you will, in these companies. So would he be for decentralization?
I mean, Thiel is interested in the ideas around decentralization. And I think he's legitimately, he's funding some of these technologies, but he's also interested in money and making money. And he's also interested in, in power and influence. And I think those goals are often at odds, right? He's a hedge fund manager. He's often on both sides of the bet. So we're seeing Peter Thiel make bets, on some of these decentralized technologies, but of course he still is a big part of these kind of centralizing technologies, and it's often very hard to know like where he stands. People probably remember earlier this year, Thiel made a comment about Bitcoin being a Chinese financial weapon, and that's something that and at the time I think that was really shocking to people who had seen him kind of as a thought leader in the crypto world. He's coming out there and basically inviting the U.S. to regulate the currency. And there are all these kind of theories like, okay, like maybe he's like maybe this is some kind of play, which I don't think you should totally discount. He's a trader. You could totally imagine him, trying to either buy low or whatever. But I also think what he was doing there was trying to make a case for a certain kind of crypto regulation in the US, right? Like we've seen Mark Zuckerberg try to argue that the U.S. government should kind of go easy on Facebook because of TikTok, which is this Chinese competitor, and Zuckerberg sort of argued like if you crack down on Facebook, then TikTok will just take over, and then it'll be sort of counterproductive. And I think Thiel has at times tried to use the same kind of logic around crypto, where he sort of said, look, if we don't regulate this in a smart way, then other countries are going to take advantage of it, and the U.S. is going to fall behind. So I definitely think he is an ally ideologically to crypto folks, especially those of the kind of like libertarian disposition. But I also think people would be right to be skeptical because Facebook and these giant companies do not necessarily have an interest in promoting these technologies. I don't think Facebook or Twitter or Google wants decentralization. I mean, what they want is to own this trend, right? That's kind of like what they do. And that is very much, the Peter Thiel playbook. When you read 0 to 1, his book, right, it talks about monopoly as being basically the endpoint of business. Most of us think of monopoly as being sort of antithetical to capitalism. And Thiel kind of argued that basically these tech companies should get as big and as fast, as quickly as possible, specifically taking advantage of network effects. And of course, that is a great way to centralize power. It's a great way to make money if you happen to own one of these companies, but it can have lots of negative consequences. And of course, it's not great for anybody who's bought into Web3. So there's a tension. So I think it's worth approaching him with skepticism, but also paying attention.